we're just delighted. The review process was very interesting. So many great work. Made us work really hard. But I think what we got, shows for the quality of work that came in. So without any further ado, we'll have a little Q&A, very informal.
There's like 3 different stories about how I came up for this. To be completely honest with you, I came up with it, and it's a snow delay in Edmonton Airport with Crystal Mowry, who is a curator at the Kitchener-Waterloo Art Gallery. We were touring together. And it came from a conversation that I overheard, that I thought was really quite fascinating. It was through a lecture that was going on about discussing DJing and competition DJing. And the argument was going on between different kind of groups of DJs about what constituted real DJing. And it was a discussion about turntabling versus using the what they consider to be the fake CD turntables. But there was a huge discussion over what constituted real DJ. And I was thinking to myself that this notion of what constitutes real or authentic, when there's a discussion happening in the DJ community, which is by its very nature a mediated event about what constitutes authenticity in a mediated structure, I thought was quite bizarre, and something probably that could only really happen now, happen today. The other part of the equation is that as a painter who makes work that comments on a legacy of abstract painting, I'm constantly in this, I like to call my Fred Flintstone moment, where I've got a little devil. You remember Fred Flintstone, when he ever had a moral problem? Like there's always a devil and an angel that pop up in his head and they'd speak into his head. About what constitutes a legitimate, meaningful painting practice today, when all the tropes that somebody employs are inevitably at 2 or 3 removes from sort of subjective experience. What I mean by that is that when I make a painting and I make a mark, my marks enter into a series of quotations with all the historical marks of abstraction. So the question is always, when I'm in the studios, where the hell am I as an artist when I'm making work, which is really nothing more than a combination of languages and tropes that have been done by other people. And I know in my head somewhere that there's something authentic, at least to me, going on in that process. But I've never been able to exactly locate where it is. And so as a result, I tend to make paintings about equivocating about the possibility of having an authentic experience. And that's why I use that quote in the call from Courtney Love, who said, I fake it so good, I'm beyond fake. That's kind of the way I make art. So all this kind of came together. I thought, well, it would be interesting to do a call for artists from a variety of different perspectives to muse about notions of the authentic. And when we looked at the work that was submitted, there was, as you can guess, a wide variety of work. And one of the first things that occurred to me was that this was going to have to be a show that was going to be about the breadth of that kind of dialogue around notions of sincerity, being truthful, rather than my perspective on it. Because there was such an interesting dialogue going on among a number of the pieces of work in the show. And I was able to kind of triangulate the problem. And so, I think I mentioned it in the catalog, but there seemed to be 3 kind of trajectories that artists that submitted work that I was interested in, at least, were dealing with. The first kind of work was a number of artists who acknowledged the problem of sincerity and authenticity, but longed for that kind of the opportunity or the possibility of art to actually be able to still speak subjectively to the soul. And the work that tends to kind of walk this kind of high wire act between acknowledging maybe the impossibility of that kind of direct communication with another individual, but longing for it all the same. As I like to say, just because we know that when we say I love you to somebody, a billion people have said I love you before, but it doesn't change the hope, the aspiration that I love you still means something. And so there's work in the show that walks that high wire mark, and I think that's you'll see it as you walk around. There's also work in the show that is what I would call of the sincerities and impossibility. So let's celebrate our thorough fakeness. All right? That's the kind of, we live in a mediated world, and mediation is us. There's individuals who are highly suspect of that kind of subjective gesture. And the work that comes from that tends to manipulate those kinds of tropes of authenticity to show just how contrived they actually are. You'll see work, I think in particular, a good piece that just sort of discusses that is Maria Whiteman's piece at the back, where you see individuals kind of stroking a bear, right? Where there's this kind of almost au naturel kind of moment until you actually realize this is obviously a stuffed bear, right? And it's being done at the Alberta Museum, which is even another layer of contrivance on it. Then there's a third group that see, I would place right in the middle, who use mediated images in a way to speak about a new kind of authenticity that is arrived at through the conventions that we employ every day. A lot of the video work tends to be about that, and I found it as an interesting kind of halfway point between either the kind of more ironic stance of some of the artists and some of the much more longing, I would never use the word romantic, but more longing, hopeful gestures of some of the other artists. There are people that stand sort of right in the middle. And I think when that third group tends to be often through work such as, Bailey Gauvier's painting back here, which is a kind of a riff on it, sort of a flat-edged abstraction with a carefully painted drip, right? Which, on the one hand, is a contrivance and it's a shtick. I like to say that good painting often winks at you. You know, it's all constantly saying, I'm this, but actually I'm kind of that, right? And Bailey's able to have her cake and eat it too in that kind of way. Another piece that I really love is the love letters right next to it with the earpiece, which is basically a transcription of a found love letter, which is transcribed many, many years after the fact, right? In pen, almost exactly the same way. And you can see that most of the artists that are in the show in some way are grappling with the problem of ultimately authenticity. Sincerity is about the self. It's about how we place ourselves in the world and whether or not we can trust ourselves as actually having a unique voice. And so when we came to making difficult decisions around the work of the show, and it was quite difficult, I tried to, as best as I could, to balance back and forth between those kinds of positions on the problem today. So as you walk around, you'll see that it's almost like an accordion kind of situation going on where you get a sense of kind of longing and then irony. And then back towards a kind of contrivance, a kind of hopefulness, and then push right back into irony again, and then come out with a little bit of hope. And it's that kind of wonderful sort of push and pull that I think makes the exhibition work. And that was kind of my thought process when I started thinking about the show. So
we also kind of mentioned, I know you talked a little bit about childhood as authenticity and how a lot of people...
Oh yes, yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that came up repeatedly, which I found very, very interesting, was that the trope for authenticity that was utilized most by people who submitted work to the show tended to engage the notion of the child. You know, that somehow this notion that children are somehow less mediated by the world, and thus their experiences are more quote-unquote authentic. And so you'll see work that appears quite childlike in this show that can be posed two ways. One is that it can suggest a kind of irony that's actually a joke, and that children is every bit as much mediated as anyone else. But also the idea that trying to recover some dreamlike time in one's past where things seem to be clearer in the world. And so there's there are works that to some extent deal with that notion of the child. There were a lot of works that didn't get in the show that were perhaps a little too safe and sure that the child was indeed innocent. One of the things about authenticity, or the authentic, is what we bring to the table as a viewer, right? The information that we carry when we're looking at a work of art. For instance, many of the pieces in here, I mean, you know, there are pieces that may or may not have been fabricated by somebody else, right? And that is part of the slipperiness of contemporary discourse around work. But what constitutes the artist? And if fabrication can happen somewhere else, then it's no longer the hand of the artist. That's actually where authenticity lies, right? And that has been something that's been kind of obvious in art making for about 50 years now, quite honestly. But it is something that artists in the show have attended to as well. I have a recommendation. This is a little bit of an aside, but I just read a fabulous book that if you're on your summer reading list. It's by Modris Extings from U of T. He wrote Right Spring years ago. He came out with a new book called Solar Dance, and it's about a trial of a forger in Weimar, Germany during the Nazi era who came up with about 15 or 20 Van Gogh paintings. And the story is really about what constitutes truth and authenticity in a work of art. And so there's this huge trial where all these experts are coming in, and they have to either affirm that this painting is a Van Gogh or it's not. And this trial, 10 I think of the 15 Van Goghs are definitely called forgers. So the guy's sent to jail. The problem is that 5 of those pieces they couldn't agree on, so they remain authentic based upon people's perspectives of this. But of course the question was, if the other 10 were fakes, where the hell did this forger come up with 5 real Van Goghs? So the reality is that the works that were considered real went off into important collections, including the National Gallery in Washington, which had one of these Daché portraits on its wall until the owner passed away in 1975, and the day after the fellow passed away, I think, the painting was pulled from the gallery, never to be seen again. The speculation is that about 40% of Van Gogh paintings in museums of the world are fakes. And when I thought about this exhibition, about what constitutes, you know, what is real, what is sincere, what is authentic, when we actually are in a constant negotiation, even in a museum, about what constitutes truth, I thought it was kind of an interesting kind of place. So I highly recommend that book to anybody who's interested in it. It's a really good, honest account of the problem of the authentic in art making. So, just a little digression.
I think on that note, we'll probably let people continue to mingle. Thank you for